Welcome to Backroom Talk.
Well, we are going to be talking about caffeine today. Some of the health and performance benefits and disadvantages of coffee or caffeine in whatever way you decide to consume it.
The caffeine isn't the actual stimulant, it's what happens when you ingest the caffeine at a physiological level. When we start talking about blood vessels that are going to the brain, right? It can make us more cognitively aware.
Obviously, amount is important. You've already discussed that. Having some protocol for deloading caffeine in for yourself, for your clients is important as well.
To listen to more Backroom Talk, be sure to subscribe. Learn to design personalized programs with the OPEX system of coaching by heading to opexfit.com.
Well, guys, welcome to another episode of Backroom Talk. I'm Georgia here with Carl. Carl is mimicking me out loud as I say that, but we'll forgive him.
The consistency is unbelievable. Like you say it like word for word, inflection by inflection. It's the same every week. That's it's impressive. Good job.
We're all about consistency here at
Yes.
OPEX, and I just want to make sure that people get what they're used to. Don't want to scare them off with some different inflection or different emphasis or like a really long vowel or something, you know.
One day I'm going to do the intro.
Catch them off guard.
People will probably like just quit the podcast.
Unsubscribe.
Yeah, they're like, we're not, this is bullshit. This is what I'm used to.
Well, we are going to be talking about caffeine today. Some of the health and performance benefits and disadvantages of coffee or caffeine in whatever way you decide to consume it. This is a topic near and dear to my heart. I don't want to say I love caffeine, but I love coffee, right? Love a cup of coffee and definitely see mostly benefits from its use in my life. I wanted to ask you, Carl, when did you begin drinking coffee? Because you're a coffee drinker.
Yeah, I am. Seriously, I got into coffee at a serious level. It was probably my freshman probably my sophomore year, so second year of college. Sorry, the barbell felt like it was like in my mind. I don't know if you guys can hear the barbell dropping. Not a big deal. Probably my second year of college. I found this I got introduced to this really nice coffee shop. So it was probably like a 20-minute walk from my house to the university, and there was a spot like 10 minutes, like right in between, and got introduced by a friend of mine to this little coffee shop, and it was just like really got into like the process, and this person was like kind of a coffee snob, so kind of educated me on, what good coffee was and all that. And I had obviously had coffee before, but this is when I really got into drinking it on essentially a daily basis. And haven't looked back since. So it's a long time ago.
Well, I'll share mine. I don't want to offend I think about 60% of our listeners are US based, but American coffee compared to Australian coffee kind of sucks for the most part. Coffee here isn't great. And so I grew up on Australian coffee, and it's very much a strong part of the culture, the cafe culture, love of espresso, everything like that. And so I grew up stealing the foam off the top of my mom's cappuccino. And so I developed a taste for caffeine very, very, very young, probably 8 or 10 or 12 years old. I was already getting into it. And then I worked as a barista. I think I started drinking coffee in high school. And then I worked as a barista through college. So drank a lot of short blacks, which would be a espresso shot throughout that time of my life.
I'm just Googling what the hell is Australian coffee. Is it grown in Australia?
No,
the beans?
No, the beans are not grown in Australia. There's a lot of local roasters, but we just have very strong cafe culture. Mm-hmm. Everyone drinks espresso, not drip coffee. So drip coffee you get here in the US is just not a thing. And we just have.
But there's probably some places in the U.S. that have really good coffee, right?
Now, if you go to bigger cities, for the most part, there are some good coffee shops for sure. Yeah. It's just not everywhere. You've got to hunt for it a lot more.
Normal. It's more the norm.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
In all of Australia, or just Sydney specifically?
If you went to a very backwoods little town, you're probably not going to get the best latte of your life. Mm-hmm. But for the most part, there's access to good coffee.
Why
everywhere.
Is that, you think?
Why?
Yeah.
I wonder if it's like a closer tie to, I want to say Europe, but it's probably not that because our
Mm-hmm.
like coffee is quite different, and the British don't have great coffee, and a lot of the coffee movement in like London and England is inspired by what you've kind of seen in Australia and cafe
Mm-hmm.
culture in Australia. So I don't know, like I don't know what it is.
Yeah, that's interesting.
Yeah,
Cool. Yeah. So, gosh, you've been drinking coffee for
a long time.
10 years, 15 years?
Yeah, probably almost 20.
How old are you?
Almost 30.
So since you were 10.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah,
Wow.
I was stealing
Oh,
sips
doing
of
the
my
sip.
mum's.
But were
Yeah.
you drinking like cups on a daily
I'd make
basis?
iced coffee at home. Not
Okay.
on a daily basis, not consistently. I would have consistently started drinking coffee in high school, so like 13,
Got
14.
it,
We
got it.
started high school at 13.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
So, those are our personal experiences getting into caffeine, but I think these guys are sick of hearing that. So we should talk more about what's actually happening when we consume caffeine, which is that thing that makes coffee fun for a lot of people.
I actually wanted to talk about coffee a little more
Oh,
from a
let's do
personal
it.
standpoint.
Let's
Not
do
just
it.
when we started, but
Yeah.
like let's talk about a relationship with coffee.
Yeah.
Right? Because we're both coffee drinkers,
Mm-hmm.
and um, sometimes coffee's given like a bad rap,
Yes.
right? Where it's like it's this stimulant. It's not sustainable if you drink it too much, and we'll get into that, right? Like where that can be the case and why that's the case, but. It gets a bad rap. Like people think like coffee drinkers are unhealthy, or it's unhealthy to drink coffee too much, or at a young age, or whatever the case is. Um, so yeah, I drink coffee every day. You drink coffee every day.
Yep.
Coffee for me it's just like it's a part of the routine. Um, yeah, like could I wake up and not drink coffee and feel great? I would not feel as good, right? We'll talk about reasons why, but I definitely wouldn't feel as good. But it's at this point I don't drink it for the feeling that it gives me, because it doesn't really give me that feeling anymore on a consistent basis. I just drink it because it's like a part of my morning, right? It's a part of that routine. And with me personally, I've messed around with for a very long time now, since I've become a consistent coffee drinker. I've messed around with deloading coffee or caffeine. Well, let's just call it coffee because that's the only caffeine that I take. And what I find is that all of those positive benefits that we'll talk about, and those feelings and the dopamine and like the focus and all of that caffeine can give people. I notice those things come back when I take it away for a good amount of time. And well, not a good amount of time, like 3 days. Like I feel a huge difference if I'm like 3 days off every few months and then add it back. Usually I try to do that on like weekends, just because of the week I don't want to mess up like my weekly rhythm and routine. Yeah, so every few months I'll go like Saturday, Sunday, Monday, or Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and just won't take any coffee or caffeine, and feels really good
Yeah.
adding it back. But big piece is just like a part of the daily rhythm, and I really, really enjoy the taste, the temperature, messing around with putting different things inside of it, all of that. COVID kind of changed a little bit of that for me for a little bit. Coffee was absolutely disgusting, and I almost cried when it made coffee really bad. So coffee still today isn't that good for me.
Because of the COVID
Yeah,
taste
yeah.
and change in taste.
Yeah, jacked up the taste of coffee for me big time. So I still drink it, and I still enjoy it. But there was a 2 or 3 day, no, probably a 3 or 5 day period where I couldn't even stomach it. Like I would almost want to throw up because it tasted so bad. So that's still sticking around, but yeah, I'm pushing through, and hopefully that goes away soon.
You're soldiering on. You'll be back to loving your cup of Joe. Is that what they call it?
I
in
think
no
that is.
time.
I think that's what they call it.
Yeah.
I'm doing my smell therapy and all that. I've been doing that for like a month and a half, and
What does that involve?
so essentially, I mean, gosh, this is another big conversation, but when you lose your taste, and or smell, when you get COVID, or when you get like if you go through like a traumatic brain injury or anything like that, there's like a disconnection of neurons in the brain, And that's why you're losing your taste or you're losing your smell, or things taste really weird or different or smell really weird or different. And it actually attacks the smell, and the taste is like a byproduct of the smell. So
Interesting.
it's like it like disconnects neurons in the brain. And the only and it's like you'll get 50% of docs that are like, yes, this is solid, this works, and the other 50 are like, I mean, it seems like it works, but you would have gotten it back anyway. So I'm just like, yeah, I'm gonna do this rather than doing nothing. So it's like this smell therapy where you take essential oils. It's and you take them across different smell spectrums or scent spectrums. So it's a clove, it's a peppermint, it's a eucalyptus, and it's a lemon essential oil. And essentially, what you do is 1 to 2 times a day. I do it like right when I wake up, when I go downstairs. You open one, you sniff it as fast as possible. So literally like for 20 seconds straight, and then you take a 20-second break. Then you go to the next one, 20 seconds. So you start with like the most complicated or complex smells, and you work your way down to the least complex. So the least complex is lemon, because we know what that smells like, and our brain kind of connects to, okay, yeah, that's starting to smell like more like what it would normally would smell or not. So yeah, I've been doing that for like a month and a half, and incremental changes or incremental improvements over that time. But yeah, trying to get my smell and taste back, so
Absolutely.
things don't taste like absolute shit.
Yeah, especially coffee.
Yeah, nothing tastes good to me right now.
No, no. Carl looks like we're heating up rotting flesh as we microwave our lunches that contain garlic and onions.
Yeah, garlic and onions. It smells like that. It smells like a carcass that's rotting in a garbage can. It's really, really bad.
Oof.
Yeah, the first time I realized that was the case, I didn't smell it, but I ate it, and it was disgusting, like so bad. I think I had like, gosh, I forgot what it was. It was like garlic powder or something, and it was like I just almost threw up all over the place. It was terrible.
Well, I hope no one else listening to this is experiencing what you're experiencing, but probably someone is. So
It's a thing. Obviously,
yeah.
I did a bunch of research after this happened to me, and
Yes.
I told you this like a month ago, but there's like serious support groups and stuff like that out there where people are like, they're going through like serious waves of depression because they can't smell things, or it's not that they can't smell, it's that things smell really bad.
Yeah.
So there's a story of this woman that the smell of her hair would make her throw up, and she couldn't sleep, she couldn't do anything. So what she had to do, she chopped all of her hair off. So she like grabbed a razor blade and just like cut all of her hair off of her head. And there was another story of like this nurse, and all she kept smelling is just like rotting bodies at the hospital. So she like had to quit her job and went through there's a bunch of these people around the world. I'm just dealing with it,
This podcast on caffeine took a very dark
I know,
turn.
right? Let's get back on track. Sorry.
Yeah. Well, I'll share just very briefly how caffeine fits into my life. So I'm a regular coffee drinker. I have 2 cups of coffee a day, one when I wake up, around like 5:30 a.m. and then one after lunch, 1 p.m. And I'm pretty consistent with that. There's been times in my life, like probably about 10, 12 years ago, where I'd take in like 10 or 12 shots of espresso per day. I definitely am not doing that anymore. And if I drink more than like 2 to 3 cups of coffee, I may feel like a little bit jittery. But other than that, I don't notice many effects. And it's possibly because I've had so much exposure to caffeine over such a long period of time. But I asked myself this, like, could I go without it? And I didn't have a good answer to that. So about a year ago, I cut out all caffeine for 2 weeks and felt completely fine. Had absolutely no withdrawals, felt no difference in energy, no difference in sleep. Like missed having a cup of coffee because I really enjoy the taste, but didn't see any changes. And I also didn't see changes when I introduced it again. Like I didn't have a different experience. So maybe I've just totally burnt out my adrenals and
Doesn't work like that, luckily. But
I don't think so.
yeah, when I was in Afghanistan, I would have probably 10 or 15 cups of coffee a day, and I did that for months and months and months and months and months, out of almost like sometimes it was like to stay awake, and other times it was just like it was just really enjoyable. So, when things aren't awesome, you're just like, okay, what can I add to kind of like, uh, bring some light, right? And it was coffee. Like we just always had coffee, and coffee was always rolling, and we were drinking it all day, every day. Didn't I don't think I had any negative effects from that though, but it was a fairly short period of time, relatively. So I'm sure there would have been some pretty serious downstream effects if I did that for like 5 years or something like that.
So let's get a little bit into what happens when we consume caffeine. So could you walk us through that, Carl?
Whew, yeah. So I think the thing that most people need to realize is that, and this is the case with all stimulants, not just caffeine. The the caffeine isn't the actual stimulant. It's what happens when you ingest the caffeine at a physiological level, like what's going on. So it is a stimulant for the central nervous system. There's some downstream effects where it feels like it's a stimulant for other pieces or parts of the body, or other systems, but it all starts in the CNS. Um, when we start to think about where, I'm gonna try to explain this like as clearly as possible. I wish I could like draw it on a board right now, but when we start thinking about what gives us the effect of that stimulant when we drink coffee, it's essentially when we ingest caffeine, it blocks adenosine, right? So adenosine is that molecule that's inside of our body that tells us to be tired, right? It's that molecule inside of our body that tells us, hey, we need to get sluggish. It's time to calm down. And there's a very close relationship with ATP, right? The molecule that gives us energy, and adenosine. So adenosine comes off the back of ATP. So let's say that we walk into the gym right now, Georgia, and we're like, okay, we need to do, sets of 15 on the back squat at a pretty high percentage. Our body's going to get excited, and we're going to start creating some ATP, and we're going to burn through that ATP. Once you burn through the ATP before more is produced, your body releases adenosine. What caffeine does, let's say that we have all of these receptors in our brains, right? We have these adenosine receptors. Let's say that those receptors are like baseball mitts, okay? And you're dropping, adenosine is the baseball. You're dropping the baseball into the mitt, and the mitt is closing on that adenosine, right? The glove is the receptor. As soon as that glove closes, when the adenosine actually goes into it, then our body, just kind of think like downstream effect, right? Like the adenosine starts going through our body, and we calm down, we get tired, we get drowsy. So if you're ever like up at night watching Netflix and you're like struggling to stay awake, that's adenosine in action that's happening. It's putting us to sleep. What happens is you take that baseball, right? A softball still fits in that glove. So what happens is when we ingest caffeine, that softball now falls into the glove. And because it's using that receptor, the baseball falls, but it misses the glove. So we don't catch that receptor. So instead of us being tired and drowsy and all of that, when the softball goes in or the caffeine goes in, we start to feel excited. We get a lot of energy. And that's not real energy. It's just that adenosine is not going through, and we're continually producing ATP. So is it a stimulant? Yes, it has a stimulant effect, but it's not a stimulant. Like we're not just dropping like fuel into the system and it's like giving us that. It's just we're getting rid of the adenosine.
Yeah.
So are you with me? Does that make sense?
I'm with you.
Does that make
I'm
sense?
with
Okay.
you. I hope the listeners are with you. But I
Yes.
think they are. That was a very clear
Okay.
description so far.
I just thought about the baseball, softball thing. I hope that works, guys. If it doesn't, just think about something else that catches something. But our bodies are super intelligent, right? We have these gloves, which are the receptors, right? Those things are falling into those gloves. The caffeine is falling into those gloves. Our body's like, we can't just not produce adenosine, or we can't not take in adenosine. So what does our body do? It produces more receptors. So we get more gloves, right? More mitts. And then those adenosine receptors start to fall into those mitts. What happens at this point when someone's like, man, I just drank that cup of coffee and I'm still tired. What do?
More coffee.
They drink more coffee, right? So if I drink more coffee, what happens? The caffeine now goes into those newly bound receptors. And what does our body do? It creates more, right? So what happens to our body when we completely stop drinking caffeine? We have all of these receptors and not enough adenosine. And the adenosine that we're releasing goes into these receptors. So the baseballs are going into the gloves, but there's no more softballs. But we have too many gloves. So when we have too many gloves, what happens when those receptors are dying off? Because that happens slowly over time. We start to feel hungover. We feel tired. We feel groggy. We feel anxious. We feel irritated, right? When people say, like, I haven't had caffeine today, that's what's happening, right? They have all these receptors and they're not filling it with caffeine. And those receptors or those gloves are like, hey, throw me the softball. Like, why aren't you throwing me the softball? But those receptors die when we don't feed them. So someone might have a caffeine hangover for 1, 2, 3 days until those receptors die, and then everything's back to normal. So what I laid out a couple minutes ago, where it's like, oh, I enjoy, like, well, I don't enjoy it, I do it. Not putting caffeine in my body for a couple days, 3 days. It's to just like get rid of those receptors and then add them back in, right? And then I start to feel those really good effects from caffeine. So I hope that makes sense.
It absolutely did. Great little description there. What next?
I think we also have to talk about, cause, I mean, there's a lot involved in it, right? Because there's also dopamine.
Yeah.
Right. So some people think that when I drink coffee, it's putting more dopamine into the system. I feel better, but that's not actually happening. What's happening is, gosh, now I have to try to like connect this to the baseball glove thing. All right, I'm gonna try my best.
Okay.
All right, so we have this baseball glove. When we throw the baseball in there, which is the adenosine, we have this mini glove next to it. Let's say for some reason, if I use the softball analogy, it would have made more sense here, but stay with me. Let's say for some reason, when that mitt catches that baseball, it has to open up a little bit wider. So we have this little mitt next to it that catches dopamine. That mitt closes, right? So imagine like there's this wiffle ball that's falling down, and that's dopamine. The glove is too small to catch it, so it just kind of falls, and our receptors don't bind to it. When the softball falls into that mitt, though, the mini mitt next to it opens up more, and it catches the dopamine. So caffeine is a great carrier of dopamine. It allows our body to take in dopamine more effectively than adenosine, if that makes sense. So the adenosine and dopamine, they don't like each other, right? We don't feel happy and excited before we go to bed and when we're tired. We feel happy and excited when we're happy and excited and we have energy, and now dopamine starts to go into the system. So dopamine, or like the feel-good hormone, binds really well with caffeine. So that's why people get like the excitement and they feel really cheerful and all of that when they're drinking caffeine, coffee, whatever it is they put in the system, because it's also carrying dopamine throughout the system.
Understood. So I think we should backtrack a little bit and, continue to talk about the suppression of, or the production of, adenosine and what's happening there, and why caffeine's effects on adenosine and the receptors, why that is problematic for sleep quality. Because that's the thing that you hear, or just sleep full stop. Why caffeine prevents us from going to sleep. So could you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, I mean, gosh, there's a lot of, there's like some direct things that we could talk about that are really obvious, right? Like lack of adenosine receptors means that we have a lack of adenosine going through the system, which means that it's really hard to calm down, right? You have caffeine at, some people, depending on the half-life of how they metabolize caffeine, someone could have caffeine at 1 o'clock like you do every day. And their half-life, like that mitt is just open with that caffeine molecule inside of it at 9 o'clock still, right? And, there's dopamine rolling, they have energy, their heart rate is up, and that's still the case at 9. someone that has a the same half life, but they don't drink their caffeine at 1, they just drink it at 5:30 like you do. That also occurs, but by like 3 or 4 or 5 o'clock, now adenosine is being dropped into those receptors, and they're able to calm down and relax. So I think that's really obvious, right? Like, what's happening at that stage, but there's also some downstream effects, right? And we'll talk about it with like some of the upsides or downsides with caffeine, but just like heart rate increases, blood pressure increases when we have caffeine. That stuff can actually be carried throughout an entire day, an entire week for some people, right? If someone has a resting heart rate of 45 beats per minute, but when they have caffeine, that jumps up to 55 beats per minute, and it's still at 55, and they're used to 45 at 9 o'clock when they lay their head down to go to sleep, they're going to have issues falling asleep. They're going to have issues staying asleep. So there's a lot of downstream effects. I guess what heart rate would be a downstream effect. There's a lot of those that aren't directly associated with adenosine and caffeine, but that's where it starts.
Yeah, I think we'll come back to it time and time again, but caffeine affects people differently. And that will be
Everything does, right?
Absolutely. But caffeine's one of those things that's so obvious because it can have such negative effects for some folks and such positive or neutral effects for others.
Yep.
So you mentioned like the idea of the half-life, and some people can drink coffee at 1 p.m. and be totally fine by the time they're trying to fall asleep by 9. Other people are going to be up until 1 a.m. because it's still affecting them. What is it that makes caffeine have a different half-life for one person over the other?
Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know.
Yeah.
I know it's the way that they metabolize the molecule,
Yeah.
but I don't know. I'm not knowledgeable enough to know why someone metabolizes it differently than others. I know that genetics plays a huge role, right? Like if you ever get your DNA tested, that's one of the markers, right? It's like, how well do you metabolize caffeine? So there's something in the genes that tell us this, we metabolize this well, or we don't metabolize it well at all. Just like we are more likely to respond well to dairy versus not, or gluten versus not. It has a lot to do with genetics, but I'm not knowledgeable enough to like really dig in and say outside of genetics, these are some behavioral things, right? I would think, right, if someone has more exposure to it, it's going to decrease their half-life. If someone was to have caffeine for the first time, hey, they might be rolling, right? They might be high on caffeine for like 8 hours, right? But 10 years down the road, maybe that half-life is now only 3 or 4 hours. But that's a little bit of a guess.
For sure. I mean, it just on a practical note, and like what a coach actually needs to apply when they're working with clients around the notion of like half-life and how late in the day can my client drink caffeine and be okay. You just have to ask questions to figure it out. And as a good practice, I mean, removing caffeine for people for a period of time, if they're open to it and willing, and they're at the point that they're ready to try something like that, I think is incredibly beneficial to see how it affects them. But also starting with caffeine earlier in the day. And over time, like let's say you have someone, they have bad sleep, they've been drinking a coffee at 3 p.m. for forever. To have them just have a cup of coffee in the morning, see if there's any changes. Okay, no changes. Maybe we can go to having that like cup of coffee at 1 p.m., see if there's any changes, so on. Just to observe on an individual level, what is the time in the day that we need to cut caffeine off by?
Yeah.
Cool.
Want to talk about some upsides? Some
Let's
positives?
do it. Yeah, let's do it. What's number one positive? What do you think?
In no particular order. Well, let's start with this. Caffeine is so well researched.
Yeah.
Right? There's no other supplement that is more researched than caffeine. And I'm calling a supplement because, in this world and fitness, outside of just doing it for pleasure, it is used as a supplement for a lot of people, even if it is just a cup of coffee before training or whatever the case is.
Yeah.
But it's so well researched. We usually say creatine is the most well researched because some don't consider like coffee and caffeine a supplement, but for this conversation, let's consider it a supplement.
Agreed. Well, I think it's fascinating because obviously the way people approach coffee is different, but there's research not just on the performance benefits, but on the health benefits as
Yeah.
well. Like you've got a very complete pool of data that isn't just biased towards, is this going to make someone faster, stronger,
Yeah.
better at sport? It's everything.
Let's start with let's start with let's just go broad and then let's get more specific, right? Like coffee makes us feel more alert,
Mm-hmm.
more energetic.
Mm-hmm.
It makes us feel happy, right?
Mm-hmm.
Dopamine. It makes us obviously stay awake, right? Those are just like some broad, feelings that coffee or side effects that coffee can have that might be positive for a lot of people. Um, when we start getting into like the more granular stuff, it's like, okay, what's happening physiologically when we drink coffee or caffeine? It's a vasodilator, right? So, um, you know, what does that mean? The vessels inside of our body, the blood vessels, open up instead of closing, right? So dilation instead of constriction. What are some positives with vasodilation, right? There's some good heart stuff connected to that, right? And a lot of research looks into how does caffeine or coffee specifically. I'm just going to keep saying coffee for now. And how does coffee have a positive impact on heart disease, right? You get someone that has like, clogged arteries and you get their blood vessels to open up. That's probably going to help. Not saying like keep up with your shitty lifestyle and just drink coffee and that's going to fix everything, but it's a small percentage of an increase that could be seen as a benefit. When we start talking about blood vessels that are going to the brain, right? It can make us more cognitively aware without even considering like the mood and the happiness and all that stuff that might come along with caffeine for some people. But yeah, we just get more blood flow to the brain, so that's a good thing, right? There's a lot of studies that say that coffee has a really good effect on someone that's I want to say, is it Alzheimer's? Sorry, I had to think of the
Yeah.
word. Alzheimer's and dementia,
Yes.
right? So coffee has a really positive effect on those folks, right? Where it's like there's some really good stuff because of the dilation to the brain. Someone that might that has like early onset or they have a family history of it. It might actually stave it away completely or just push it a little bit more to the right. So there's some good stuff in the brain as well. When we start looking at athletic performance and how can drinking some coffee and it having the effect of dilating the vessels, what are some positive effects there, right? Aerobic capacity or aerobic ability. A lot of studies in endurance studies and how coffee helps increase endurance over a long period of time.
This is totally unrelated, but what was the I remember there was a lot of hullabaloo around was it beet juice for endurance
Yeah.
athletes? Was
Yep.
that for the same reason?
Yeah, same
Yeah,
idea.
yeah, okay, I
Yeah,
thought
same
so.
idea. And I mean, if we talk about what's actually happening inside, and why and why that dilation is occurring, it's nitric oxide, right? It has nitric oxide in there, and that's the correlation with beet juice. It's the nitric oxide in there, and if something opens, what happens, right? It gets more oxygen, it gets more nutrients. You can push things to the right just a little bit more. Yeah, there's a lot of good things there. Yeah, that would be number one is just vasodilation for me.
Yeah, so where do we it's obviously a benefit. It's obviously a like kind of cherry on top of already having good lifestyle practices in place though for someone. Like you said, if someone's having cardiac problems, drinking a few cups of coffee per day is not going to be the thing that solves it. We need to make sure that they're looking after their shitty lifestyle as well. But there could be some good therapeutic uses of drinking some coffee there. As a coach, when are you thinking about like introducing caffeine as a supplement or coffee as a supplement for the purpose of vasodilation?
Never.
Right?
I know. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, never. I think, realistically, I would look at it with someone that was, if I had like a runner, right? And the runner's like, hey, it's tough for me. Like, I do my runs first thing in the morning. It's tough. Like, I don't feel great. Like, I need something in my gut. I need some calories, but I feel terrible when I eat food. Like, what can I do? For that person, it's like in my head, I would think like, oh, we could actually, have some really good benefits in their running sessions and get some calories in through like some coffee concoction in the morning, right? We can add a little bit of fat, maybe add some protein in there.
A little collagen.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Some vital nutrients, chocolate
Mm-hmm.
collagen. I shouldn't say their name until
So
they sponsor
good.
us. Um, yeah, just something like that, right? Like I would probably think about it then, Georgia, but I don't think I would ever like be like behind a laptop and thinking like, oh man, coffee's the answer here,
Yeah.
because it's so nominal, right? The things that we're talking about, they're not they're not noticeable for most people.
Yes.
They might be noticeable for that person that's trying to like eke out that final percentage, but yeah, drinking coffee isn't going to completely change someone's life in a positive way, physiologically.
Yeah, I like to come back to that because I feel like in any conversation where some supplementation comes up, that's so often the
Yeah.
answer, right? Like this thing could have some small percentage benefits. Like don't totally discount it. It may be nice for that like 1% that you're looking to eke out. And it may be just a good reason to affirm what you're already doing and
Mm-hmm.
feel good about a behavior choice that's already in place.
Yeah.
But let's not overcomplicate it and think that we're like giving someone this like magic prescription by
Yeah.
telling them to drink 2 cups of coffee per day. And also give our clients like a long rant about like drinking coffee for vasodilation because you're just
Yeah.
going to overwhelm them.
Yeah.
So walking that line, understanding the why behind it is great, but just don't make things more complex than they
Not
need
gonna
to
lie
be.
though, Georgia. Every time I have a cup of coffee, I'm like, "Ooh, this is doing this for me." And
Blood's really flowing.
I'm telling myself that story every morning. I'm just like, "Yeah, getting after it."
Whatever
Um,
makes you feel better.
yeah. Next piece would be, I think this one. I think a lot of people know of this one. But it's just some fat burning effects that come from drinking coffee. And it's not only from an aesthetic standpoint. There could be like some fuel utilization conversation to be had here as well. But um, the effects are actually so noticeable that some organizations actually ban the sport that you participate in, right? Like weight sports, right? Where you have to be at a certain body weight and all of that. They actually made certain levels of caffeine in the blood illegal because it was seen as like a performance enhancing drug because the fat burning properties were so noticeable, especially when you get into those lower percentage people where someone needs to cut like 1% body fat or that last percent or drop that last 5 pounds. The metabolic benefits from caffeine or coffee are pretty noticeable. Um, and it's pretty high dosage though that you have to take to get that.
Which is risky, right?
Yeah, that's not like 100 milligrams a couple times a day. That's like 300 milligrams 2, 3, 4 times a day.
Yeah, you're popping caffeine tabs.
Yeah, I mean you can get it through coffee still
It's
though.
true.
Yeah, you can get. I mean,
A few energy drinks.
you talk about your espressos in
I
Australia,
was probably
right?
putting that away.
Yeah, you could definitely get that in. It's probably more efficient to get that amount in through caffeine pills and stuff like that. But the interesting thing is that everything that we're talking about right now, on the positive side, the potential positive side, it's not seen the same when you take caffeine in non-natural ways, which is super interesting. The fat burning stuff is though. Fat burning stuff is, but when we start talking about like the health benefits and like really digging into the papers there, it's not the same. It's not the same when you're popping a caffeine pill versus drinking coffee. And I'm not exactly sure why that is. I think it might be a quality thing,
Yeah.
and how that caffeine is produced. If I don't know if it's like micronized or whatever when they put it in capsules, but it's something they lose something when they take it out of a natural form. That's why I don't know if you remember like 15 years ago, green tea was like the thing,
Yes.
like all of the benefits of green tea and all of that. A lot of those research studies weren't on coffee; they were on green tea. But since then, a lot of those studies have been done with coffee, and they showed the same benefits as green tea.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, caffeine as a fat burner or something that can increase fat burning, what is happening with metabolism as you consume a cup of coffee that causes that to be the case?
Yeah. It's increasing, right? Because the system is increasing. Remember we talked about, I don't want to get too much in the downsides, but the increased heart rate and the increased blood pressure, right? What happens when our heart rate increases by 5 beats per minute for 12 hours throughout the day? What impact does that have on our metabolism? A fairly substantial one, right? Like that's a lot of additional beats per minute. That's a lot more work at the end of that 12 hours that your body had to do to just like stay functioning. So your metabolism just increases. And then from a performance standpoint, just think about, let's talk about the endurance person again. Let's think about what that supplement does when fat burning properties are increased. What are you not burning more of or sooner? You're not burning muscle glycogen. So there's some studies in the endurance world of how caffeine is glycogen sparing. It's because you're burning through fats before you get to that muscle glycogen. So for an endurance athlete, caffeine could be extremely beneficial, especially when you start extending it out into, longer ultra endurance events. If you could just burn as much fat as possible and hold on to muscle glycogen as long as possible, that's going to be a performance enhancer.
I don't know if I want to put this in like the advantages column or benefits column, but it also suppresses appetite, right? So if we're talking about fat loss, and we know that if we want to lose body weight or body fat, we need to eat in a caloric deficit. If your appetite is being suppressed by the caffeine or the stimulant that you're taking in, you're probably going to eat less food.
Do you know where that suppressant comes from?
No, I don't.
Dopamine.
Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, because think about a lot of time, and this is like a suppressant, right? Like it doesn't just get rid of your appetite. If you're hungry, when you drink, like if you're truly hungry, when you drink coffee, you're still going to be hungry, right? Like you might get like that little dopamine hit and feel a little bit better, but you're still hungry. For people that like, let's say you're 1 o'clock, right? Let's say you ate lunch at 11 and you were still like, I'm still doing coffee at 1. If you just stop doing that, I would bet that you would want to eat something at 1 instead of drink that coffee. If you weren't drinking that coffee, you're probably not like hungry, but your body's just searching for this like happiness, right? Dopamine. So because dopamine increases when we drink coffee, that kind of rids us of having to eat that food to get that dopamine. So yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I mean, you see a lot of people in recovery as well going for a cup of coffee to get that little hit and to have something to consume instead of reaching for cocaine.
Yeah. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, if you not that I hang around with like a bunch of people in recovery, but certainly know some and have just like done a little research on that world. And you're definitely reaching for a cup of coffee is common
That's
behavior.
really interesting. Is it seen, not to get too off track, is it seen as what were they, a trigger? Could it be a trigger or not? Not really.
No, as far as I know, and like maybe someone correct me if I'm wrong, but again, the people that I've spent time with, it's just a behavior that they have, and it's again kind of like a clutch or something for them in a social situation, but it's not a negative thing by any means. It's just,
and I just asked that because
to.
sometimes you're like you'll get someone that's getting over some type of addiction, and the goal is to stay away from anything that could possibly be addicting. And I'm not saying like caffeine falls into that, but it can for some people. So I was just saying, like, could that be a trigger? Maybe not, because it's so far away from cocaine. Maybe not as far as most people think, actually, now I think about it. I don't know. I have to think about that. That's really interesting, though.
It's something to do some more research on for sure.
Yeah.
So we've talked about potential fat loss, metabolism effects of caffeine. I almost said alcohol because we did a podcast on alcohol a few weeks ago. We're going through all of the beverages.
I know, right?
Anything
Next, we're going
else?
to do one on
kombucha.
kombucha. Yeah, that's a good one. That's so good. One more thing, yeah. Caffeine may decrease muscle soreness, um, and muscle pain, right? So soreness post-workout, so it can decrease delayed onset muscle soreness, and it can also decrease muscle pain while you work out.
Yeah.
So there could be, some obviously some health benefits from that because you're not feeling like crap after doing some resistance training if you pushed it a little bit too hard. And then on the performance side, well, I guess that would also fall on the performance side because you can go back and repeat some work a little bit sooner. But on the performance side as well, you can, because it decreases that muscle pain, you can push a little bit harder.
Yeah.
Right? And that all comes from, because remember we said that caffeine stimulates the CNS. If the CNS is stimulated, everything's just firing, right? So if the CNS is firing more effectively as you're doing those back squats, you might be able to get a couple more reps. You get in a couple more reps, you might be damaging a little bit more muscle tissue. You damage a little bit more muscle tissue, you're going to grow bigger muscles, right? Or if the CNS is stimulated and you're doing singles, you might be able to lift, 5 or 10 more pounds because that CNS is so stimulated. So there's some good stuff in decreased muscle soreness and power.
What about on the, I guess on the non-performance side, potential like decreases in muscle soreness or like perception of pain? Is there anything there with caffeine?
What do you mean?
So I've heard people like suggest drinking a cup of coffee for example, like period pain or PMS symptoms as a way to potentially reduce the discomfort that someone's feeling from that. So I'm drawing connections. I'm like maybe making leaps, but just wondering if there's anything there.
No, I think I said that right when I said it could decrease delayed onset muscle soreness.
Yeah, so same
from exercise. Yeah, same idea. Something that I've never really grasped though, and I think this is just like something that I learned so long ago, and kind of just stuck with me, is and this is like small percentage stuff, but it's when you learn something a long time ago, you can't forget it. Is people using caffeine post-workout to recover immediately. And you see a bunch of supplements out there right now that are like coffee post-workout recovery supplements, not just flavor, but there's actually like a bunch of caffeine and coffee in there. And just like, I don't even know if it's old school way of thinking. There's a bunch of people that still think this, but you have to think about like recovery and post-workout and all of that, and what are the best things to put in your body. And now you start thinking about hormones, right? We haven't talked about this, but we would hit it in the downsides, but coffee increases cortisol, right?
Yeah.
So, caffeine increasing cortisol, what do we want to rid ourselves of post-workout? Cortisol, right? So that's something I've never really understood. If you're not like training really hard and you don't really need to recover, right? Like you just did, something that's 60% under your capabilities and you're drinking coffee post-workout because you enjoy it, not going to affect you at all. But if you're like, getting after it in the gym and and you really need to recover, maybe don't have caffeine post-workout.
It's so funny that you say that because I remember you maybe like 2.5 years ago making a comment to me about drinking coffee after my workout, jokingly about how I was going to like kill my gains. And I was like, well, shit.
Oh, that's funny.
I actually don't drink coffee after my workout anymore, but it's because I used to have one pre-workout and then like at like 9 or 10 a.m.
Yeah.
And now I just have the early morning coffee. But
was that the reason?
That might have like actually influenced it slightly, but no, I did want to go from 3 cups to 2 cups, so it was a deliberate choice just to reduce overall coffee consumption, and but I definitely thought about it. All right, so any other advantages? Have we missed anything in the advantages column?
No, I think we covered it.
What about disadvantages?
What's the big? I have a couple, but what's the biggest one that stands out to you?
I mean, sleep is the thing that is the most obvious that comes to mind. Like negative effect on sleep, people not being able to fall asleep because of the things that we've discussed earlier on.
Yeah. I actually that's probably what I should have been thinking, but I was thinking something else. But let's hit sleep though really quick. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Thoughts on it?
Yeah, just
Was
like I know we already talked about like why potentially
yeah.
sleep could be decreased and all of that. But where do you sit on it? Like what are some things you look for when someone has, not as high quality sleep and they're consuming caffeine? I know you already talked about like when are they drinking it, try to cut it out and all of that, but um, I'm just kind of trying to lead you to this because I know that you just finished a book on
Yes.
sleep, and I just want to see some correlation in your
Yeah.
brain there.
Yeah, I'm like totally blanking honestly on anything to say like beyond what we've already discussed on sleep and caffeine.
hmm
Um Help
You know
me
what,
out.
what comes to mind with sleep
Yeah.
with me is the biggest thing that one of the biggest things that I see in other people, and I even see in myself
Yeah.
when I'm having issues sleeping, is thoughts, right? Like people overthinking it. Um, so let's say someone drank coffee at 1 o'clock
Mhm.
and someone told them like, hey, you shouldn't drink coffee 12 hours from when you're going to lay down and go to sleep. That person might just be like laying in bed thinking about how they can't sleep because they had that coffee at 1 and their heart rate's increasing. And I'm not saying like, sleep disruptions are in people's heads when it comes to coffee consumption, but I think just the thought of drinking caffeine and some negative side effects from that could affect some people when it comes to laying down and trying to go to sleep.
Definitely. Completely agree with that. And yeah, that like thought process, like trying not to catastrophize things
hmm
with clients, I think is incredibly important. And I
Yeah.
know I went through the whole like cut it out, like make sure that you talk with people if they're having trouble sleeping, like try and bring coffee earlier in the day, but you have to be delicate in how you're discussing that. Like you don't want to tell people that just because they drink coffee at 3 p.m., they're going to have a terrible night's sleep,
Yeah.
Like there's got to be like upfront conversation, like caffeine can interrupt sleep, but let's just see where you're at and like not stress about it too much.
Yeah, I think it's all in the conversation and how you position it. And the way I would do it is I think I'd be like, hey, I don't know. I don't know what's affecting your sleep. We know X could be affecting it. Are you really stressed out? Are you recovering from training? Are you thinking about things when you're laying down? What does coffee look like? Maybe let's mess around with, taking that coffee away at 3 o'clock and seeing how that affects, right? It could be it. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But it's that like, think about that versus, oh, it's definitely the coffee, right? Like you can't drink coffee. That's going to keep you up all night. And they like can't help themselves on a Thursday and they just like have a little coffee at 2 o'clock and they're in bed and they're like, oh my God, coach said this is going to kill my sleep. It's going to kill my sleep. I don't know what to do. I'm never going to fall asleep. And they're just like an hour later staring at the
They're
ceiling.
like squeezing all their muscles trying to produce adenosine and just nothing's
They're like, I want to produce the baseball glove. I need another baseball glove.
I'm gonna do that next time I lay in bed.
Count baseball gloves, not sheep.
Yes. Yes,
Man.
indeed.
Yeah, the biggest thing that came to mind, or the first thing that came to mind, it should have been sleep, but it was using caffeine as a crutch.
Yeah.
Yeah, that came to mind. Where it's like, it's okay, if I get 5 hours, I have caffeine, right? Like I'll just drink a bunch of coffee tomorrow, or I feel like I don't have energy. I feel like I'm not happy. I feel like I'm not alert. Just caffeine, 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 caffeine. So it could just be a band-aid, right? How do we say it, right? A band-aid to a shitty lifestyle. So there could be some things that could be shored up through better lifestyle practices, and people are just like covering it up with caffeine. So yeah, it's almost like prescribing macros and how we think about that. Maybe don't get to caffeine until everything else is squared away and right in your BLGs. But yeah, I think some people could just use it as a band-aid or a crutch.
Absolutely. And it's not to say that you have to remove it for those people either, but it is understanding and examining the relationship that they have
hmm
with that thing, just like anything.
Yep. And yeah, intentions behind why we're using the supplement, right? Um, and I think most people are well intended, where they're just like, I really enjoy it. It's a part of my thing. I enjoy the taste, blah, blah, blah. But hey, maybe they're telling themselves a story. Maybe to start this podcast, I was fucking telling myself a story. Maybe I'm addicted to caffeine and I'm like, oh, I need it. But I definitely am addicted to the taste, and to the action of drinking it. I don't know if I'm addicted to the feeling. I don't think I am, because I don't really get a feeling anymore, but unless I come out of those deloads. But yeah, I'm definitely addicted to like the process of making it, and having that hot beverage going down my throat.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting way to phrase that.
I was gonna not say it. That's why I
I'm glad
paused,
you
and I'm
did,
like,
though.
yeah, that's pretty funny.
Guys, it's Friday afternoon here. We're a little bit loopy if you hadn't noticed. I think we either need a cup of coffee or a good night's sleep, one or the other.
Right. I couldn't think of the word Alzheimer's.
That's ironic.
I did like a. Oh shit! Now I'm worried. Now I'm gonna be going to bed tonight. Like, oh my god, is this early onset?
Just need to drink more coffee.
Yeah, some other things are just we mentioned them before, but the increased heart rate.
Yep.
There's some positive things, right? When we talked about fat burning and readiness and all of that stuff, but definitely a lot of negative side effects of increasing your resting heart rate. So heart rate increasing, blood pressure increasing. For someone that already has high blood pressure, they're just like shuttling a bunch of caffeine in or coffee in, and it's probably not doing them any favors.
Yeah, and for someone who has anxiety or is an anxious personality, it can really feed into that as well. Feed into those jitters, that heart rate, that high blood pressure. So having questions or asking questions to your clients, if it's appropriate, and if, maybe they present as a more anxious type, trying to determine like where they sit on that spectrum and whether or not coffee could be feeding into that is a worthy conversation if that's an area you're working on.
Yep. And then I guess this is kind of a recap of how we started, but a negative side effect is just those adenosine receptors just being constantly blocked, or those baseball mitts being constantly filled with those softballs. Yeah, that's definitely a negative side effect. Well, initially it's a positive side effect because you're getting all those good things from caffeine, but you have to keep drinking more and more coffee to get those positives that you're feeling. If you keep doing that, you're obviously going to create more, and they're still going to get filled. And if you take it away, you're going to go through that coffee withdrawal or caffeine withdrawal. So I think people just need to be aware around the amount. Because the amount is really important. There's a big difference between 250 milligrams and 500 milligrams. So I think if someone's having a couple cups of coffee a day, depending on how they respond to that, they'll probably be okay. And I don't think they're blocking their receptors too much, and they could probably stick with that over a longer period of time. But I would recommend people just kind of go off of it for a couple days a week, maybe even a couple weeks like you do, or like you did. Every now and again. I would recommend it every couple months. Like if you're constantly boom, 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 just give the system a little bit of a break. Take it away. And if you're so like not addicted, that's the wrong way to put it. But if you're so used to and you just so enjoy that like hot beverage going down your throat every morning, switch to a decaf for those days, or have a non-caffeinated tea. I think there's some really good things, kind of deloading from that and then reintroducing it.
Yeah, on the deloading conversation, I just a personal anecdote, but anytime I get sick, taste of coffee is terrible. It doesn't have to be COVID sick, but anytime I have any kind of like nose and throat thing, I stop drinking caffeine altogether. And then this is maybe a little embarrassing, but anytime I'm like a little bit hungover, like even like one or two drinks, I do not like coffee the next day, which is bizarre. I don't know why that is. Most people go the opposite direction and want caffeine.
It'd dilate those vessels,
man. It probably would. But when maybe it's like being a little bit dehydrated, I don't enjoy the taste of it at all. So I get my coffee deloads when I've had a couple too many drinks.
Yeah. So you're deloading every weekend, pretty much.
That is not true.
I'm joking.
That is not true.
George is like, I don't drink coffee on the weekends because I'm just smashing vodka sodas.
No, that's
Captain
not my
and
life
Cokes.
anymore. Ew. Ew. Well, I think like kind of takeaways in terms of application of drinking coffee or supplementing with caffeine. Obviously, amount is important. You've already discussed that. Having
Mhm.
some protocol for deloading caffeine in for yourself, for your clients is important as well. Timing is important, i.e., when is it being drunk throughout the day? That's going to be more important for some people over others. You're going to have to ask questions to figure out who that is important for and who it isn't. And then, like the type of coffee that's being consumed as well. Something we haven't talked about is there's a lot of people that don't just drink black coffee. Like
Mhm.
us sitting on this couch, we're, I think, for the most part, black coffee drinkers. I like a latte or something like that every now and then, but we're typically not putting a ton of sugar and cream in our coffees.
It's only me and Georgia sitting on this couch. Georgia's like, for us that are sitting on this couch, listeners are like, how many fucking people are sitting
We're
on
just
that
kind of
couch?
friends sitting in between us.
It's like ghost right there.
No, but I think it's always worth the conversation with your
Mhm.
clients as to what they are actually putting in their coffee. Is there a few spoonfuls of sugar sneaking in there? Is there a bunch of cream? If they are a weight loss client, that can have a very negative effect on their goals without you realizing it, especially if they are taking in 3 or 4 cups per day. And something you can observe as well is that there's a lot of people that don't actually like the taste of coffee. They might like the effects of it, or they might like the taste of what they're putting in their coffee. So, something to observe, ask questions on there as well. And I think it's fairly safe to say most people in most nutrition camps believe that minimizing added sugar is a good thing. Sugar's I mean, a little bit of sugar here and there, half a teaspoon of sugar in your coffee is probably not going to be the thing that kills you. But there's a lot of people that could do with minimizing sugar that they're putting in their bodies throughout the day.
Yeah, and I'll end it on there's no fucking magic in putting a bunch of fat and protein in your coffee and calling that a fast and having that from 6 a.m. to noon before your first quote unquote meal, even though you already consumed 600 calories through MCT oil.
Are people still doing that? The bulletproof coffee? Is that a thing?
Hey, I didn't use the name.
I think I think we all know what you were saying.
Oh, okay, fuck. I don't know. Yeah, I would assume so.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was like all the rage. There was cafes selling like bulletproof coffees.
Yeah, I
People were just
remember
like
that. Yeah,
drinking those things with their muffins,
Yeah.
like taking in 1,200 calories. I mean, that sounds delicious. All the power
That
to
does
you
sound
if you
good.
want to. But
There was
again,
a spot in Austin.
Mhm.
I drink the creamer.
Picnic,
There
right?
was a spot called Picnic, and they had unbelievable, like, I forgot what they called. They didn't call them bulletproof coffees, but it was the same concept.
Yeah.
And they made those things taste there was one that had like cayenne pepper,
Yeah.
and it was like so good. So I'm making fun of it, but we would actually, I think it was on Sundays, we'd go downtown Austin. We'd stop at Picnic. I wouldn't eat breakfast because I would I'm like, fuck, I'm going to have like 500 calories from this drink. So I would fast, quote unquote. Me, the boys and Janice would go to Picnic. We'd grab one of those and walk around the farmer's market. And so I'm making fun of that, and I actually did it for like quite some time. But I didn't do it. I did it because I realized it was so many calories and I didn't need to eat breakfast before I went there.
Yes.
But yeah, some of those things could be really delicious.
Oh, I've been there. They have amazing gluten-free baked goods as well.
You've been to Picnic?
Yeah. When we were in Austin, I've been there.
I didn't know this.
Yeah, I feel like I told you that.
You didn't tell me this,
Yeah,
no.
yeah. Really, really good.
Oh,
And
man.
like my dream Sunday situation is to have a coffee and some kind of like gluten-free brownie and to walk around a farmer's market.
Mm.
So hearing you describe that, I was like, I need to find a farmer's market this weekend and do that.
Yeah. Yeah, there's we'll talk about this outside the podcast. I was going to talk about this farmer's market me and Colton found the other day, but well, the listeners don't need to hear that. They probably
Backroom
don't,
talk.
they don't really care.
No, they definitely don't. So, guys, that's our episode on caffeine. If you're drinking coffee right now, hopefully you're feeling good about your decision and not too bad about it. But maybe there's some lessons in here that you can go and apply to yourself, to your clients. Maybe take a little break for a minute if you need to make sure that you are drinking caffeine with balance.
Yeah.
That's it, guys.
Drink responsibly, right?
Yeah, that's
what
the thing they say.
Yeah, yeah. Do it.
Bye, guys.
See you guys.